Welcome to Marta Family Secrets.to Richard. Ever stand in a crowded room and feel completely, utterly alone? Not the kind of alone where you're physically by yourself, no, I mean the kind where people look straight through you, like you're a smudge on the window, like you're just background noise in somebody else's highlight reel. Like you don't even exist. That was me. That was my whole life for longer than I want to admit. My name is Marcus. And this is the night everything changed. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. My wife, Claire, had been chasing this promotion for 3 long years. 3 years of late nights, skipped dinners, missed anniversaries, and quiet sacrifices that she never once acknowledged out loud. I watched her pour herself into that company like water into cracked concrete, wondering if anything would ever hold. And when the night finally came, when they finally gave her what she had been bleeding for, I was proud. Genuinely, deeply, embarrassingly proud. I ironed my best shirt. I rehearsed kind things to say to her colleagues. I even bought her flowers, white peonies, her favorites, and held them behind my back like a fool in love. Because that's what I was. A fool in love. The ballroom they rented for the celebration was the kind of place that smells like old money and new ambition. Crystal glasses, catering staff in pressed black uniforms, jazz playing softly underneath conversations that were anything but soft. Claire looked radiant the moment we walked in, and for a few seconds, she squeezed my hand. Just a few seconds. Because the moment her colleague spotted her, she was pulled away like a tide going out, and I was left standing on the shore, holding flowers nobody asked for. I set them down on a table near the back. Smiled at a passing waiter. Found myself a glass of water, not even wine, just water, and I stood there trying to look like a man who had somewhere to be. But I didn't. I had nowhere to be in that room. And the worst part? Nobody noticed. I watched Claire laugh with her coworkers, watched her tilt her head the way she does when she's performing confidence rather than feeling it, and I kept telling myself, this is her night. Let her have it. You love her. Let her shine. And I meant it. Every single word. Because the truth is, I had always been her quiet engine. The man running in the background while she stood in the spotlight. I had worked 2 jobs, 2 exhausting, spirit-draining jobs, just to fund her master's degree. I had skipped my own academic conferences to stay home when she was overwhelmed. I had edited her presentations at 2 in the morning and never once asked for credit. Not once. Because I didn't need the credit. I needed to know that she saw me. And then came the moment I realized she didn't. His name was Richard. Richard Holloway, senior director, and the moment I saw him working his way across the room toward me with that smirk stretching across his face like a crack in expensive china, I felt my stomach drop straight to the floor. Richard was the kind of man who had mistaken cruelty for charisma so many times that he genuinely couldn't tell the difference anymore. He wore his arrogance like a badge of honor, loud, constant, impossible to ignore. And from across the room, I could see Claire watching him approach me. She saw him coming. She turned away. Richard stopped right in front of me, scotch in hand, and looked me up and down like I was a second-hand piece of furniture that someone had accidentally brought into a luxury showroom. So you're the professor, he said, and the word professor came out of his mouth like a punchline. I smiled. I told him yes, that was me. Must be nice, he said, loud enough for the small circle forming around us to hear, living off a woman who actually knows how to succeed. The room didn't go quiet right away. It sort of dimmed. Like someone had turned the brightness down slowly. And I stood there, holding my water glass, feeling something cold and heavy settle into my chest. I looked over at Claire. She was looking at her shoes. That cold feeling in my chest? That was the moment, right there. Not the insult. The silence that followed it. Her silence. The person who was supposed to be my partner, my home, the one human being in that room who knew everything I had sacrificed, and she looked at her shoes. Something inside me didn't break. It just went very, very still. And Richard, mistaking my stillness for surrender, smiled wider and raised his glass. What happens next at this party, what Richard says in front of the CEO himself, and what I had been quietly carrying in my pocket the entire night, you are not going to believe it. Stay with me. Part 2 is coming. There is a specific kind of humiliation that doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves. Small ones at first, just enough to make you question whether you're being too sensitive, whether you're imagining it, whether you should just laugh it off and move on. And then the waves get bigger. And bigger. Until you're standing in the middle of someone's celebration, soaking wet, and everyone around you is pretending not to notice that you're drowning. That was me. That was that night. Richard didn't stop at one jab. Men like Richard never stop at one. The first one is just a test, just a little flick of the finger to see if you flinch. And when I didn't flinch, when I just nodded and smiled and let it pass, he took that as an invitation. He started working the room. Moving in a slow, deliberate circle, pulling people into the orbit of whatever story he was building, and I was the punchline at the center of every single one. He talked about Claire's husband, the academic, with this particular tone, this soft, almost sympathetic mockery, like I was a charity case she hadn't had the heart to leave behind. He made little comments about how it must be so lovely to have a quiet life while your wife carries the weight of the real world. He laughed, and people laughed with him, not hard, not cruelly, just enough. Just that polite, nervous, social laughter that says I know this is wrong but I don't want to be next. And Claire stood in that ballroom the whole time. She was never more than 15 feet away from me. 15 feet, and a whole universe apart. I kept waiting. I kept watching her face across the room, hoping, embarrassingly, childishly hoping that she would walk over. That she would put her hand on my arm and say something. Anything. Even just, "Stop it, Richard," 2 words, just 2, that would have told me I still mattered. She refilled her champagne instead. And then Richard decided that a slow death wasn't enough. He wanted a spectacle. He moved to the center of the room, the physical center, like a man who had rehearsed this moment, and he raised his voice above the jazz and the clinking glasses, and he called out to me directly. Not a whisper. Not a private aside. A declaration. He said he wanted to talk business. He said he wanted to discuss the firm's latest merger, the biggest deal they'd closed in years, and he looked right at me with that snake smile and told the entire room that even a man like Marcus should be able to follow along if he tried hard enough. Don't be a coward, he said. He actually said those words. And then, as if that wasn't enough, as if the room falling silent wasn't enough, he turned to the CEO standing near the bar and said that my lack of backbone was probably why Claire had to carry our entire household on her shoulders. The CEO didn't laugh. But he didn't stop it either. And the room, that glittering, crystalline champagne room full of accomplished, educated adults, held its breath and waited to see what I would do. I looked at Richard. I looked past him at Claire, who had gone the color of old paper. I looked at the CEO. I looked at the small red light on my phone screen sitting on the table beside me. And I agreed to the debate. Wait, before you hear what happened the moment that recording started, I have to ask you something. Has anyone ever underestimated you so completely, so casually, so publicly, that the anger you felt was almost quiet? Almost calm? Like your body didn't know what to do with that much feeling so it just went still? Drop a yes in the comments if you know that feeling. Because what happens in that room in the next 60 seconds is exactly what that silence feels like when it finally speaks. Part 3 is going to change everything. There is a moment in every trap when the door swings shut. Most people never see it coming. That's what makes it a trap. Richard saw nothing coming. He straightened his jacket. He squared his shoulders. He looked at the small gathering that had formed around us, men and women in their expensive evening wear, holding their expensive drinks, and he smiled the way a man smiles when he believes, with his whole chest, that he is the most powerful person in any room he enters. He had no idea that the most dangerous man in that ballroom had spent the last 10 years consulting for the very regulatory body currently investigating his firm. I want you to sit with that for a moment. While Richard was out here making toasts and cracking jokes at my expense, I had been sitting in closed-door sessions with federal compliance officers, reviewing documentation on the exact merger he was now preparing to lecture me about. I knew this deal the way a surgeon knows a patient's chart. Every clause, every loophole, every irregularity that had made the investigators narrow their eyes. But Richard didn't know that. And I let him not know it. I played my part beautifully. I nodded slowly, with that particular nod that says I'm trying so hard to keep up. I furrowed my brow at the right moments. I asked the kind of questions that made Richard's chest expand 3 inches, the questions that invited him to explain things he absolutely should not have been explaining out loud, in a ballroom, to a room full of witnesses. So when you say the timeline was accelerated, I said, soft and uncertain, does that mean the standard review process was skipped? And Richard, glowing with condescension, laughing a little at my adorable ignorance, said yes. Not just yes. He explained exactly how. He named figures. He named the individuals who had signed off on things they shouldn't have signed. He used the word workaround 4 times, and each time he said it, I watched the legal career I had spent a decade building arrange itself around his words like a net. He was so intoxicated by the performance of his own intelligence that he stopped hearing himself. But other people were hearing him. I saw it happen gradually, the way a dawn comes in. First one face in the crowd shifting, losing its amusement. Then another. A woman near the back straightened slowly, setting her glass down. A man beside her leaned toward the person next to him and whispered something. Claire had gone completely still, and for the first time all night, she was looking directly at me. Not at Richard. At me. And my phone was not just recording. It was streaming live audio to the compliance inbox I had set up 3 months prior, as part of an ongoing advisory engagement that Richard's firm had never been told about, because they were the subject of the inquiry, not the client. Richard was handing me everything. Every word, every name, every number, every breathtaking, arrogant, incriminating detail, and he was doing it with a smile on his face because he thought he was winning. He admitted to bypassing legal protocols to fast-track the deal. He said it clearly. He said it proudly. Like it was a badge of honor. And I stopped nodding. I looked past Richard's shoulder to where the CEO was standing, and I watched the color leave the man's face like water draining from a bathtub. He wasn't pale from embarrassment. He was pale from the specific, cold, nauseating realization that the man he had trusted with his company's most sensitive transaction had just confessed to financial crimes in front of 40 witnesses and a live recording. The CEO didn't walk over slowly. He crossed the room in 8 steps, and when he reached Richard, he didn't say congratulations. He didn't say well done. He said, very quietly, I need your phone and your resignation. Tonight. The silence that fell over that ballroom was nothing like the silence from earlier in the evening. That first silence had been amused, waiting, hungry for my humiliation. This silence was cold and flat and full of reckoning. It pressed against every wall. Richard turned to look at me. And for the first time all night, he had nothing to say. Oh, but the story doesn't end in that ballroom. Because what happened in the car ride home with Claire, that is the part that broke me and built me back up in the same breath. Do not go anywhere. Part 4 is coming. You know what they don't tell you about winning? They don't tell you how quiet it is. How the victory you imagined would feel like fireworks actually just feels like the last door in a long hallway closing behind you. Soft. Final. Irreversible. The ballroom emptied faster than it had filled. Lawyers appeared. Phones were confiscated. Conversations became hushed and urgent in corners. Richard was escorted out with his jacket crooked and his face completely rearranged, all the smugness replaced by something small and frightened, the face of a man who suddenly understood the weight of the words he had thrown around so carelessly. And I walked to the coat check. I retrieved Claire's wrap. I waited by the door. She came to me eventually. She always came to me eventually. The drive home was 40 minutes on an empty highway, and Claire talked for 38 of them. She was sorry. She hadn't known the full extent of what Richard had been doing. She didn't know about the insider trading, not really, not the details. She'd had suspicions, vague uncomfortable feelings she hadn't let herself examine too closely, because examining them would have complicated things, and she couldn't afford complications, not with the promotion on the line, not with everything she had worked towards sitting right there within reach. She said my name 4 times in those 38 minutes. Marcus. Marcus, please. Marcus, say something. Marcus, I need you to understand. And I understood. That was the terrible part. I understood everything. I understood that she had known, somewhere beneath the ambition and the carefully maintained silence, that Richard was reckless and dirty and dangerous. And I understood that she had weighed that knowledge against her career and her career had won. I understood that when he had stood in the center of that room and publicly gutted the man who had worked 2 jobs to fund her future, she had made a calculation. A cold, quiet, devastating calculation. And I had come up short. The flowers I had brought her were still on the back seat. The white peonies. Slightly wilted now, their heads beginning to bow. I watched them in the rearview mirror while she talked. When she finally ran out of words, when the silence stretched long enough that she had to either fill it or sit inside it, she reached over and put her hand on mine. Say something, she whispered. And I said, very gently, I'm thinking. What I was thinking was this. I was thinking about every morning I had woken up before her to make sure the coffee was ready. Every night I had stayed up rewriting her presentations because she said she couldn't sleep knowing they weren't perfect. Every birthday dinner I had cooked from scratch because restaurant noise gave her headaches. Every time I had diminished myself in a room so she could take up more space in it. I was thinking about how I had never once, not once, asked her to choose between me and her ambition. And I was thinking about how she had chosen anyway. Not with a dramatic announcement. Not with a confession or a fight. Just quietly, incrementally, in 100 small moments of looking away when I needed her to look at me. In 38 minutes of explanations that were really just a long, elaborate way of saying that she had seen what was happening and decided her seat at the table was worth more than my dignity. I didn't cry in that car. I had passed the point of crying a long time before that night. The grief I was carrying was too old and too settled for tears. It sat in my chest like a stone that had been there so long I had stopped noticing the weight of it. But I noticed it that night. We pulled into the driveway and I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel and the engine ticking as it cooled. Claire waited. She was good at waiting when she wanted something. I'm going to need some time, I finally said. She nodded. She thought I meant a few days. A difficult week. A conversation we would eventually have and come through the other side of. She didn't understand that I had already come through the other side. Alone. Months ago, possibly, in some quiet part of myself I hadn't let myself acknowledge until that night ripped everything into the open. I know what some of you are feeling right now. Some of you are thinking about your own version of that car ride. Your own 40 minutes. Your own person who should have spoken and didn't. Your own flowers wilting on the back seat. Stay with me. Because part 5 is where I tell you what I did next. And it isn't what you expect. It isn't rage. It isn't revenge. It is something much harder and much more beautiful than either of those things. One more part. Don't leave now. The legal storm that came for Richard Holloway arrived fast and without mercy. Within a week, he had been formally charged. His assets were frozen. Federal investigators descended on the firm like weather, and the whole pristine, glass and marble structure of everything he had built his ego inside began to crack and then collapse. His name became a headline, then a cautionary tale, then a footnote. I didn't follow the coverage closely. I didn't need to. I had said what I needed to say in that ballroom, not with anger, not with performance, but with patience. With the quiet, deliberate kind of strength that only comes from knowing exactly who you are and being willing to wait for the right moment to let the world see it. But the Richard chapter was never really the story. Richard was just the catalyst. The real story was always about Claire. Always about the silence in the car. Always about the choice she made in that ballroom that she thought I hadn't noticed. I noticed. I moved my consulting work first. There was a firm, smaller, less flashy, built on the kind of integrity that doesn't make for good cocktail party stories, but makes for very good sleep at night. They had been trying to bring me on for 2 years. I called them the Monday after the party. They didn't even ask why I was ready now. They just said welcome. Then I had the conversation with Claire that I had been preparing for without knowing it for the better part of a year. I didn't shout. I didn't list grievances or keep score. I told her the truth, simply and completely, the way you tell someone a truth that has no villain and no solution, only a door that has already been walked through. I told her that I had loved her with everything I had and that I believed she had loved me too, in the way she was capable of, and that sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes love without respect was just a beautiful word for a very painful thing. She cried. Long, shaking, genuine tears, the kind that came from somewhere real in her, and I sat with her in that grief because she deserved to have someone sit with her even then. Even in the ending. And then I left. The separation was quiet, like most true things are. Our lawyers handled the details. Claire threw herself back into her work, which is what she had always done with feelings she didn't know how to carry. I heard through mutual friends that she received a smaller promotion 6 months later, that the firm stabilized eventually, that she was doing all right. I was glad. I meant that with my whole chest. I was glad she was all right. Because I was more than all right. The silence in my new home was nothing like the silence of that ballroom. It was not the silence of invisibility or of being looked through. It was the silence of a life that fit. A space that was entirely mine, shaped around my rhythms, my hours, my bookshelves arranged the way I had always wanted to arrange them. Morning coffee with nobody waiting for me to be smaller. Long evenings with work that meant something. Deep, dreamless sleep that I had not been able to find for years. I won't pretend it wasn't lonely sometimes. It was. There were evenings when the quiet pressed in a little too close and I'd sit with it and breathe through it and let it be what it was. Grief doesn't announce itself politely. It shows up in the smell of white peonies at a market stall, in the sound of jazz drifting from an open restaurant door, in a Tuesday afternoon with nothing specific wrong at all. I let myself feel all of it. Because feeling it meant I had been real. It meant the love had been real, even when it hadn't been enough. And that mattered to me. It still does. The last time I saw Claire was accidental. A coffee shop near the university, early on a gray morning. She was sitting alone at a table near the window, both hands wrapped around a mug, staring at something on her phone. She looked up when I walked in and there was a moment, just a breath of a moment, where we were just two people who had loved each other and couldn't get it right. I nodded. She nodded back. I ordered my coffee. I found a table on the other side of the room. We didn't speak. It was the most honest conversation we ever had. I'm not sharing this story because Richard got what he deserved, though he did. I'm not sharing it because I handled that night with grace, though I tried to. I'm sharing it because for too many years I believed that love required shrinking. That being someone's partner meant folding yourself into the shape of whatever space they left for you. That being quiet and steady and endlessly giving was the same thing as being valued. It isn't. You are allowed to require respect. You are allowed to look at the person who should be your greatest advocate and say, this is not enough, I deserve more than this. You are allowed to walk away from a life that fits everyone else perfectly and fits you not at all. You are allowed to build something new in the quiet, something that is entirely, unapologetically yours. Tell me in the comments which part of this story hit you hardest. Did you see yourself in the ballroom, standing at the edge while someone you loved looked away? Have you ever had to make that silent, devastating decision to stop waiting for someone to choose you and start choosing yourself instead? Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because here is what I know now, what I carry with me into every room I walk into, what I whisper to myself on the hard evenings when the quiet gets heavy. The most powerful thing I ever did was not exposing Richard. It was not the recording, not the compliance board, not the legal case that followed. The most powerful thing I ever did was decide that I was worth fighting for. Even when I had to be the one to do the fighting. Even when I had to fight alone.